China's economy is crashing, and Chinese youth's morale has hit a new low. Young people in China have so little hope in CCP that they have given up on trying and are choosing to be full-time children. Instead of finding a job or starting a business, they are depending on their parents and hoping for a salary for just living with them. Now, we already know everything going on with the Chinese real estate market, but now effects are spreading. Stock market is crashing, companies are leaving China, and Chinese youth are giving up on their future. All the while, CCP is only making things worse for its citizens. In an environment where the CCP needs more businesses to come to China to stimulate the economy, the communist government is raiding and harassing foreign businesses in Beijing to scare them away. So in this video, let's go over exactly how bad the shape of the Chinese economy is in, and why the CCP is hell-bent on making it worse. First and foremost, as usual, please drop a like on the video. It only takes you a sec and plays a huge role in overcoming the algorithm that doesn't like our videos very much. Let's start with the Chinese youth and how their situation got so bad. We feel like we've shown this chart hundreds of times in our past videos, but here's China's GDP over the past few decades. They've experienced an explosive growth in their economy as China opened up to the world and became the global manufacturing hub. This led to noticeable improvements in people's lives. We can see that if we just look at GDP per capita, millions of people who were born in underdeveloped villages in rural China were pulled out of poverty and now are living a pretty respectable middle-class life. That's a huge advancement in the span of a few decades. If we look at China's income graph, we can see that in 1990, the average Chinese citizen was making $330 annually, and by 2019, that figure is close to $10,000. That kind of increase in a nation of 1 billion plus people is no small feat. The government did have to do a lot of forceful and questionable stuff to achieve this, but it's still impressive. The main issue here is that there were a lot of questionable policies along the way that the government implemented that are coming back to haunt them now. One of these policies was the one-child policy.
China's one-child policy devastated generations of families over its 35 years in effect.
Great-grandmother down through 5 generations. This family is a perfect example of China's population crisis. There's only one great-great-grandchild.
Chinese couples now have official permission to have more babies. The government today got rid of its highly unpopular one-child policy and said couples can now have 2 children.
Fearing overpopulation, the CCP forced families to only have 1 kid. As most of us could have guessed, this led to many problems that we're going to need a whole separate video to cover, but here's a quick summary of what's important for this topic. Because of the CCP's one-child policy, it's expected that soon the country will have more older people than young workers. Here's China's demographic period in 1980, around the time the one-child policy went into effect. This is great for any nation. A lot of working adults and kids. Adults are productive members of the economy right now, and kids will be productive members of society in the coming future. The older population? Well, they already put in their hard work, so now they get to live off of the work from the economically productive members of the society. That's why any growing economy usually has a lot of productive members and a smaller number of non-productive members. But due to the one-child policy, China's population wasn't able to replace itself. Think about it. You need 2 kids just to replace the parents in the future, and maybe a little bit more to make up for any unexpected deaths. That's why the replacement birth rate is around 2.1. But due to the CCP's policy, this is what China's demographic period is supposed to look like in the coming decades. A lot more older people in their retirement, less working age people, and even less kids, which means the future is looking pretty bleak. Coming back to our topic about China's youth, there is a lot of cultural pressure on them. Older generation who worked hard and witnessed China's exponential growth now have their expectations set high. They expect their kids to continue the same progress for the family and the country. They expect the current generation of workers to get a higher education, get a high-paying job, and continue building towards a better life for the family. This is not to say that other cultures don't have the same expectations for their kids, but in China, this expectation is a bit unrealistic with the way the CCP is managing the economy. Because of Chinese culture, a lot of adults are expected to take care of their parents, and sometimes even their grandparents too. Then on top of that, they are expected to constantly succeed in their work life, save up for a house, get married, and keep progressing. This is already too much pressure on a working population that is shrinking in China, but the problems don't stop there.
These are tough days in China for many who are young, looking for work, and just not finding it.
In May, the youth unemployment rate hit a new high, nearly 4 times the national level.
It's unclear as to exactly what is going to propel this economy forward.
Currently, China's youth unemployment rate sits at a jaw-dropping 20%. Nearly 1 in 5 young workers don't have a job. This is in part due to the Buy Lawn movement, but also in part due to there not being enough jobs. In the early 2010s, the CCP made a heavy push to get China's students to pursue higher education, which sounds like a great thing, and it usually is. The more educated a population becomes, the better it is for the economy. But in China's case, everything didn't go according to plan. The CCP expected China to be a more mature economy by now, but China's economy is still driven mainly by low-income manufacturing jobs. So when the government pushes students towards higher education, these students expect high-income, high-skilled jobs when they graduate. And now, the CCP is realizing that there just aren't enough jobs for all these highly educated graduates. This is creating intense competition between graduates to land what little jobs China's economy does have to offer. In this situation, any competent government would tailor policies to attract foreign companies that need this labor and promote more business activity locally so that graduates can find jobs. But what does the CCP do? The exact opposite, as we will get into soon. When you factor all this in, you can see why finding a job is getting harder and harder for China's youth, and the CCP has been no help. And then COVID hit.
When Wuhan was locked down at the end of January, a city of 11 million people quarantined.
By December the 11th, up to 200 people were likely infected with the coronavirus.
Administration official says the White House is considering more travel restrictions. Tonight, Americans are scrambling to get out of Wuhan, China on a charter flight organized by the State Department.
Even though the CCP did a good job containing the spread during the early days of COVID, you can't say the same for 2022. When COVID cases spiked again in Chinese cities in 2022, the CCP went on an all-out war to achieve its utopian goal of zero COVID. Brutal lockdowns killed countless businesses and stifled any economic bounce back that China's businesses had been working towards. The global economy was also slowing down, which heavily impacted China and its local job market. As you can see, the job market is shrinking more and more, and cultural pressure to be successful is piling up on China's youth as they get older. As we have discussed in previous videos, much like the American dream, the Chinese dream is to get a job and then buy real estate. Real estate holds a very important significance in Chinese culture. Men with real estate are considered high status and more suitable for marriage. Going back to the CCP's one-child policy, since families were only allowed one child, a lot of them favored having a boy over a girl. This has led to a drastic mismatch in the male-to-female ratio in China. There are about 70 million more men than women in China. This makes the competition for marriage even more intense, much like job market competition. This is part of the reason why real estate prices have been skyrocketing in China over the past few decades. And before someone comments, let us clarify. We're not saying this is the only reason behind the real estate bubble. There are many other factors that play a bigger role, but marriage desirability is a small part of the reason behind the price rise in China. Even though the real estate bubble seems to be popping in China, buying an apartment is still very much out of reach for many households. In fact, if we look at this chart from 2016, we can see that many Chinese cities rank in the top 10 worst cities in terms of home prices versus average income of residents. Things haven't improved much now either. We can't find a chart, but here's a table with the same data. You can see there are still many Chinese cities in the top 10. So, real estate ownership is important in China if you want to progress in life, but it's nearly impossible to buy based on average Chinese salaries. Jobs are getting incredibly hard to get because of intense competition for the small numbers of jobs that are available when compared to a large pool of prospects. If you are lucky enough to get a job, working culture in China is intense, especially when compared to the salaries being paid. It's common to see the 9 to 9 to 6 work schedule in China, meaning you work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, all while making very little. And if you dare complain about anything, employers have all the leverage since they can replace you in a heartbeat due to the high demand for any job opening. As the situation kept getting worse and worse, and the CCP was doing very little to improve the economy, a movement started brewing in China.
There is an undercurrent of dissatisfaction brewing among the young in China.
Quiet quitting have racked up more than 150 million views on social media app TikTok.
At the time when the job market was hit hard by the nation's economic slowdown, some started thinking, why not just lie flat?
Chinese youth have started giving up on trying in an attempt to force the government to improve the situation. So far, on Weibo, The related hashtag has accumulated over 93.2 million views, and searching for the phrase on Zhaohongzhu results in over 2.6 million user-generated content (UGC) instances. It's spreading so quickly that the CCP has actually started censoring the keywords online. Talking about censorship, some of the videos we're making on this channel are sometimes considered too controversial for YouTube, and the almighty algorithm may not recommend them to you. So, if you guys can take a quick second to hit that subscribe button, it would help us out a lot. Young people have burned out after trying so hard for so long to no avail. This is how they make sense of it in their mind. Someone has to be a loser because of the way the economy is set up. Too many people and not enough jobs. Real estate prices are too high and salaries ain't. So why try so hard if you know you are just going to fail? If you don't try at all, then at least you are not disappointed when you inevitably lose. So that's basically the thinking behind the whole let it rot movement. We know it sounds crazy to some older folks, but that's how it's being looked at in China. Have you guys ever played a game where you are losing so badly that you just stop trying because there's no chance you are making a comeback? So why not at least save the energy? Well, that's pretty similar to how Chinese youth are feeling towards life. Even though it may sound silly to some, this is turning into a serious problem for the future of China's economy and the communist government. CCP officials have publicly come out and said that this attitude will slow China's growth and will result in generations of slackers. State media has already started publishing articles about why the youth should avoid Bailan and refuse that mindset. But so far, the movement is not slowing down. Recent data only shows that things are getting worse. Most recent filing by CCP shows that youth unemployment sits at 21.3%. Keep in mind, CCP is known for padding statistics to make things look better than they actually are in reality. So if it is publishing 21.3 youth unemployment, there's a good chance reality is worse. So after this report went viral, the Chinese government said that it would stop publishing this information from now on. We're guessing CCP thinks that if we don't publish the problem, everyone will think everything's fine. Unfortunately, that's not how the world works. The decision to scrub a widely watched report exasperated the concerns by investors and executives who say ever-tightening government control of information is making it harder to do business in China. First, let's cover why investors are scared, which is causing a crash in the Chinese stock market. China is facing a potential debt crisis. In the non-financial sector, debt as a share of China's GDP has surged from 200% to 300% in the 12 years that Xi Jinping has been in office. Government debt, corporate debt, and household debt levels in China are incredibly high. Although the government would almost certainly intervene to prevent a large-scale financial crisis, it will only create a bigger problem for itself further down the line. On top of all of these macro issues, Xi Jinping also seems hell-bent on scaring away foreign businesses too. Last month, China's newly revised counter-espionage law expanded the definition of what could be construed as spying, a reflection of Xi's heightened security state. The law alarmed foreign businesses and governments because it stipulated that sharing documents, data, materials, and objects could be considered spying if the information had a bearing on national security and interests, a criteria seen as overly broad and potentially arbitrary. U.S. firms in China have long complained about what they have seen as an unfair business environment, with limited protection for intellectual property and preferential treatment afforded to domestic competitors. Those fears have been compounded this year by a broad crackdown on U.S. consulting firms operating in China. Earlier this year, Chinese authorities raided American consulting firms, Mintz Group and Bain & Company. CCP claims that it was for national security reasons, but the true reason becomes more clearer once we look at what these firms were working on. There's one topic relating to CCP that we haven't covered on this channel yet, but we're sure you guys know about it already. The topic is CCP's treatment of Uyghur Muslims in China's Xinjiang region. One day we'll release a detailed video on the topic, just waiting to figure out how to tell that story without getting age restricted by YouTube. Anyways, coming back to the topic on hand, because of reports about CCP's treatment on Uyghur Muslims, United States passed Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, a U.S. federal law that changed U.S. policy on the Xinjiang region, with the goal of ensuring that American entities were not funding forced labor among ethnic minorities in that region. It was signed into law by U.S. President Joe Biden on December 23, 2021, and stated that commencing 21st of June 2022, any company that imports goods from Xinjiang region needed to certify that those goods were not produced using forced labor in order to avoid U.S. penalties. Many companies who operated in China hired consulting firms like Mintz to help carry out the research in their supply chains in Xinjiang province. As soon as these firms started looking into the issue, they were raided for national security reasons by the CCP. We think you guys get what CCP is really trying to hide. This also kind of sends a signal to foreign businesses and investors that doing business in China is not a safe move. Because of all these issues and more, foreign investment in China is down to a 25-year low. Direct investment liabilities, a gauge of foreign direct investment in China, slumped to just $4.9 billion in the April-June period, according to figures released by the State Administration of Foreign Exchange. That was down 87% from the same period last year and was the smallest amount in any quarter in data back to 1998. Firms are reinvesting less of their existing profits back into the country and are choosing to bring excess money back to their home. This all led to Chinese stock prices to slide for most of this year. China's benchmark CSI 300 index was down around 4.2% this year as of writing of this script. Global investors have become net sellers of Chinese shares, with outflows from Chinese domestic stocks by foreign institutional investors reaching $10.2 billion so far in August. In hope of reviving the confidence in its market, CCP cut a tax on trading, which did help stock gain a little, but the gains were quickly wiped out. The new measures don't fully address investors' concerns. Investors feel bearish on the economic recovery of China. Changes in taxes don't address the issues with the economy. Economic outlook is looking so bad that CCP is stopping economists and analysts from publishing their true thoughts on China's economy. Many experts outside of China believe that China may be experiencing a similar slowdown to that of Japan in the 1990s. Back then, a bursting asset price bubble triggered Japan's lost decade, resulting in a 30-year period of stagnation. Economic growth slumped from averaging 4.5% year-on-year through the 1980s to 1% ever since. Economists do not expect growth to fall quite so low in China, but the end result for China will be worse. That's because China is experiencing this pressure at much lower levels of per capita income than Japan did. Although Japan's economy slumped, it remained a wealthy nation. China might be the world's second largest economy, but its GDP per capita in 2022 was just $12,756. That is roughly a sixth of that in the US and barely above the global average. If it stagnates now, China will be stuck in the middle income trap. Xi's Chinese dream will die.